and what promises to be the most interesting panel for the pre-event, focusing on foreign and security policies in the Balkans. Now, we've got here four very interesting presentations, diverse as well, but they all capture on some very important, topical, and challenging aspects of the foreign and security policies in the Balkans. Given the delay that we already have today, I'm going to ask the presenters to try to keep their presentations within 10 to 15 minutes, but closer to the 10-minute mark rather than the 15 minutes. I will be showing you signs for 2 minutes and the end of the time, so please look at me over there. And so without further delay, I'm going to start with introducing our presenters. And the first presenter is Alper Kaliber from Yaşar University in Izmir in Turkey. He's going to present a paper on regionalism, and regionalism is an aspect of Turkish foreign policy towards the Western Balkans. Now, I've read the abstract of his paper, and I have to say I'm really curious to hear the whole presentation of what promises to be a really fresh reading on regionalism and the regional aspects of post-Cold War foreign policy in the Middle East and in the Western Balkans. Now, Mr. Kaliber himself, he is a PhD graduate in political science from Bilkent University in Ankara in Turkey, but currently works as an assistant professor in international relations at Yaşar University in Izmir. So, without further ado, I invite Mr. Kaliber to present his paper.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I will try to stick to my very short length of my time. So today I'll mainly talk about the changing nature of Turkish foreign policy in the post-Cold War era, and I will argue that this change can mainly be explained as the regionalization of Turkish foreign policy. As you know, Turkey tries to construct a new foreign policy identity, and this foreign policy identity is mainly based on region-focused activism. So while saying regionalization, I basically mean two things. So regionalization in Turkish foreign policy refers to two interrelated processes. First, the process whereby security interest definitions and threat perceptions in Turkey have gained increasingly regional character. And secondly, the process where Turkey has, again, increasingly defined itself as a regional actor. In fact, the first regionalist tendencies in Turkish foreign policy had already began in 1990s. So a new rhetoric and discourse of security has emerged, placing Turkey's strategic and security articulations in a more regionalist base. But Turkey's regionalism has set itself mainly in 2000s regional activism. So this is also parallel to the rise of region as a unit of security globally in the post-Cold War era, in fact. In tandem with the collapse of the Cold War security architecture, region has attracted much more attention of the analysts and practitioners of security. So the increasing interest of international relations scholars to region as a new unit of security led to a new regionalist turn within the IR, basically. So for the regionalist security approaches, region has become the main locus of conflicts and cooperations within the states in the post-Cold War era. So states freed from the exigencies of global bipolar rivalry have found new incentives and instruments to focus on regional issues of regional conflict and cooperation. The principle of territoriality, assuming a direct correlation between geographical proximity and the intensity of security interdependence, still shapes security dynamics in this era. So most states threaten and are threatened only by neighboring states. So this is a fact creating meaningful concentration of enmity and amity in regional bases. But regional security approaches often conceive regions as territorially fixed and exclusive entities constituted by coherent patterns of security unique to them. So basically, they treat regions as already established entities and that can objectively analyze within certain criteria by the analysts. For instance, for Buzen and Weber, the whole world is divided into mutually exclusive regional security complexes, insulator states and global powers. But I argue in this study that regions are not pre-established, fixed, and merely geographical entities. Although often described in geographical terms, regions are political creations. Even regions that seem inalterable, the most natural and inalterable are the products of political and political construction attempts. So the process of region definition, region building is political in nature, and it necessitates the use and dissemination of specific rhetoric of national regional security. By considering all these facts, now I want to just focus on the Turkish regional discourse, defining Turkey as a multi-regional power. So, for the Turkish foreign policy elite, the demise of global bipolar rivalry, where Turkey's position was solidly defined within the Western Bloc, had created seemingly two paradoxical results. On the one hand, this new era impelled Turkey to become a more assertive regional power, standing at the nexus of conflict-ridden regions characterized by instability and unresolved inter- and interstate disputes. The new security architecture emerging in the post-Cold War era situated Turkey in the virtual epicenter of Bermuda Triangle, comprising the Balkans, the Middle East, and the Caucasus. But on the other hand, the radical transformation of the geopolitical strategic landscape in the Balkans and in the Caucasus following the breakup of the former Yugoslavian and the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia Republic and the Soviet Union, opened up new regions to Turkish influence. Turkey is an anchor of, to this view, Turkey is an anchor of stability within unique geographical position at the intersection of Europe and Asia, could play a constructive role in its vicinity. So this regionalist rhetoric establishes a firm relationality between Turkey and the fate of these regions, such as the Middle East, the Balkans, and the Mediterranean. This link is also referred to depict the multidimensionality of Turkish foreign policy and also Turkey's widening sphere of influence. So, in tandem with the Middle East, Caucasus, and the Mediterranean, the Balkans represent one of the core regions of Turkish region-based, region-focused activism in the recent years. In quotes, the fault line extending the Balkans to the Middle East and the Central Asia presents a geographical and integrated geopolitical scene and effect requiring an integrated geostrategic vision. This was a quote from Turkish foreign minister. So, okay, yet this new geopolitics of sphere of influence not only creates opportunities, but also makes Turkey vulnerable to new sources of insecurity. So, in such an environment, according to new security approach in Turkey, Turkey can guarantee its stability through only more active and transformed foreign policy, which will transform it from a mere bridge country to a pivotal state. But the Turkish foreign policy elite also sometimes talking about the Ottoman geopolitical space. This led to some comments regarding the neo-Ottomanism of Turkish foreign policy. According to this ideology, the Ottoman past, the Ottoman the historical legacy provides Turkey a geographical depth and strategic depth so that Turkey become a regional power. For instance, to Ahmet Davutoğlu, Turkey enjoys multiple regional identities and thus has the capability and responsibility of practicing multidimensional foreign policy. So the unique combination of our history and geography brings with it a sense of responsibility to contribute actively towards the conflict resolution and international peace and security in these areas is a call of duty arising from Turkey's Ottoman past. So one may deduce from the above quotation that the argument regarding the Turkey's responsibility, regarding Turkey's regional responsibility, are often laden with historical determinism. But I won't go into details of this. So how many minutes do I have? How many minutes do I have? 5, okay. Okay, maybe it's time to just a bit focus on Turkey's initiatives in the Western Balkans. As you may see here, the region of the Balkans constitute one of the main aim of Turkey's regional activism. But as it is directly the focus of this conference, I will try to summarize some Turkish initiatives in the region of Western Balkans. So In recent years, Turkey's growing diplomatic dynamism in the Western Balkans has become manifest, in fact. So Turkey try to focus on new issues maybe ignored in the previous years. But by the way, as I said, regions are political constructions. So the term Western Balkans, for instance, were absent a decade ago. Maybe we were much more using the term Southeast Europe. As a matter of fact, different institutions uses different definitions of Western Balkans. For instance, for the European Commission, Western Balkans comprise of Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and later Kosovo. But for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Western Balkans include above states minus Croatia. So this is a new definition, new grouping of states, and of course, in every, like as it is in every definition, it has some political, economic, and even ideological aims. That's why we are focusing on the regions. We always need to ask such questions as who defines this region, with what purposes, and what is the aim of this region building. So this is also valid for new region-focused activism of Turkish foreign policy, actually. So when we look at Turkey's initiative in the Western Balkans, it mainly focused on so far primarily on the Muslim countries like Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo. So this is also related to domestic politics and a certain answer to domestic audience in Turkish policy. Turkey's diplomatic efforts in the region have mainly three interlinked objectives. One, to maintain good relations with Turkey's traditional Balkan partners, to improve ties with the countries which we had relatively problematic relations, and three, to assume a mediatory role and to take multilateral initiatives in the region. So that's why, as I say, in the new regionalist discourse, there is a discourse of normativity. Turkey now is a power, soft power, using peaceful means and encouraging regional integration. This makes it as a sort of normative regional power. So as far as relations with Bosnia-Herzegovina, Turkey focused its activities on this country. Maybe you already know it, but as far as relations with Serbia are concerned, Turkey initiated a high-level mutual visits. For instance, Boris Tadic came to Turkey, and Prime Minister Erdogan and Gül had already visited Serbia. So Turkish officials have asserted on several occasions that they regard Turkey and Serbia as neighbors, even if they are not, they don't have any joint border. So Ankara views Serbia as a key country for peace and stability in the Balkans. This was a quote from another Turkish senior politician. So Turkey's policy maybe we can very briefly outline 5 reasons for Turkish activism in the Balkans and in the Western Balkans. So the first one is the common, long-standing common history of Turks with the peoples of this region. So although this common history has not only smooth, the populations and cultures of this region are very familiar to each other. In that point, it is counterproductive for Turkey to remind its Ottoman past, even its imperialist Ottoman past. That's why I think the discourses on neo-Ottomanism now are not used by the government officials, actually. The second reason is the human factor. According to the official statistics, more than 1 million Turkish minorities live in different Balkan states. So after centuries of migrations, unbreakable ties have been established between Turkish society and particularly some Muslim communities in the Balkan regions. And those Turkish citizens with Balkan origins also form a natural lobby in Turkey. The third reason for Turkey's engagement in the Balkans is associated with geography. Any instability that emerges in the region may have political, economic, and cultural ramifications on Turkey. So for this reason, having peace and stability in the Balkans is among the Turkish foreign policy top priorities. Improving economic presence in the region is the fourth reason, basically. Turkey's foreign trade with the Balkan countries was 2.9 billion US dollars in 2000. But this has increased to 17.9 billion dollars in 2008. But this is still very low, in fact. So there is a potential to improve here. Okay. So just to conclude, Turkey tries to define itself as an emerging regional power and pivotal state, bearing the capacity of order instituting in its region. But this region-focused activism does not always produce very fruitful results. So I try to critically here summarize this new regionalist discourse and outlook. But I just agree on the point that Turkey just should not define itself as a Western country, so it should diversify its foreign policy aims, instruments, and objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alper, for your very interesting presentation on Turkey's foreign policy and its relations with the Western Balkan countries. Our next speaker today is Vujo Ilić. Now, he graduated in International Affairs at the University of Belgrade, the Faculty of Political Sciences, where he is currently pursuing his graduate degree. Today's presentation is titled Between Neutrality and Ambiguity, Serbia and NATO, and explores the political discussion, the public discourse about Serbia's relations to NATO. So, Vujo, the floor is yours.
I'll see if that's okay with you. So, what I'm presenting today, and I'll really try to fit into my 15 minutes if that's not too much. What I'm presenting is more an essay than a paper, really. More an academic essay in its early stage, and although I'm not a security or defense expert, I have the courage to speak before you today, and I really think it makes sense if I get some really good feedback. So my topic is NATO debate in Serbia, current NATO debate. I'll just tell you briefly what am I going to speak about, mainly three things. I'll try to explain why I'm talking about ambiguity in Serbian foreign and security policy. Then I'll try to say what are the consequences of this ambiguity and what are ramifications in terms of this public discourse about NATO. And then I'll try to assess very briefly the arguments that favor NATO membership of Serbia. So a short introduction. After the period of Euro-Atlantic integrations that started to be a foreign policy goal of Serbia in 2001, which was a sharp turn from NATO being a major enemy of Serbia in 1999, there was another turn that came in 2007. After the breakdown of Kosovo negotiations, NATO was branded as a major culprit, and the Serbian parliament had a declaration proclaiming military neutrality in 2007. But it's not my impression that this decision has support in political elite. There is no research, as far as I know, that explores this, but it's mostly considered shallow neutrality. It's not strategically defined. It has no roots, basically. It's considered to be a temporary deviation from a Euro-Atlantic course. There are strong divisions inside the political elite. If you look at positions of political parties in the governments, there are those who oppose it, those who are for it. In parliamentary opposition, of course, the same thing occurs. Even in a leading government party, the Democratic Party, there are currents that favor, that oppose, and that are ambiguous, let's say so. However, I have a feeling dominant sentiment is pro-NATO. That's basically the way that the political elite is seeing things developing. However, a big problem is two-thirds majority of population that are against NATO membership. So pursuing any policy in the direction of rejecting neutrality and re-establishing this Euro-Atlantic policy is that A, it will inevitably hurt at the elections, and B, in order to be efficient, in order to be seriously understood abroad, it has to have at least 30 to 40% support in a country. I mean, current level is at 16. These are data from the BCSP's latest polls in July, and this is below any acceptable support that a country must have in order to pursue any foreign policy goal. So the situation is like this. Official neutrality is not rejected. NATO is officially not an agenda, but everything indicates that the government wants to keep these doors open. And this is a source of ambiguity. And I argue that this ambiguity is fueling these public debates, and the debates are in really bad shape, to say that at least. The debate recently came in two waves. One was January 2010, when there was a petition signed by some 200 intellectuals, oppositional leaders, that asked for a compulsory referendum on NATO accession. It had a limited success. It was not a totally unsuccessful petition. But however, in June 2011, there was a new wave of protest against the Strategic Military Partnership Conference in Belgrade. Again, a new wave of debate appeared. And elections are coming next year. There is going to be a new wave of debate in months to come. So how does this influence the debate? Basically, there are two entrenched camps. The supporters of NATO accession, of NATO membership of Serbia, are basically branding any arguments against it as emotional, as irrational, not based on pragmatic means, not looking on the national interest or anything like that. So any argument is discarded. The other side sees the arguments of NATO proponents as NATO lobbyists, and even accepting to discuss their arguments is sort of going into their agenda. So there is no real communication. The problem is that it creates contentiousness and it keeps repeating itself. And my argument is that debate, a proper debate, would benefit everyone. The proponents, the opponents, the general public sentiments. What I argue is that every debate should have some rules, and I say the most useful logical rule is that those who assert a claim should carry a burden of proof. That basically means that proponents of NATO membership should have their say. That would be the first step. The second step would be scrutinizing these arguments that say what are the benefits for NATO membership as strongly as it's possible. If there are some arguments that are good enough, that are valid, that are based on proofs, then we should go into third step, arguments against NATO membership. Then the fourth step, criticizing these arguments. Then in the fifth step, we could start looking for some consensus. So everything is basically about the arrangement of the debate. So what I'm trying to do this is briefly say how do I see this second step. So the critique or assessment of those arguments that say that NATO membership is beneficial for Serbia. As a starting point, as a first step, I used a debate that was held in Politika newspaper, Belgrade Daily, that was held in January, February 2010. It was organized as sort of a debate that asked participants to say what are the benefits, what are the costs. There were 22 articles. 12 of those were sort of in favor of NATO membership, bringing up the arguments. And I managed to identify 8 arguments that keep repeating themselves. So I will just briefly say what are these arguments about and what I think about them. That's the whole point. And by the way, of those 22 participants, 20 males, 2 females. So that's sort of how much say does gender have in security policies. So the first 4 arguments I grouped into NATO, the benefits of NATO as deterrent of external threats. These are 4 arguments. The first argument says that membership in such a powerful alliance will make Serbia more powerful, and that basically it's better to be seated on the table than to be on the menu. This argument keeps repeating itself, and it makes sense, really. But there is a little problem with that. In general, international relations theory says, and I'm referring primarily to Walt's 1987 Origins of Alliances, that states don't join alliances in order to increase their power. They do so in order to deter a threat. So strong states ally in order to counterbalance an existing alliance or a threat. Small states tend to bandwagon. And this is basically what is a policy prescription of this argument. Bandwagon in order to deter a threat. The problem is what threat? If you look again at the polls did from mid-2011, subjective sense of security in Serbia is quite high. There are no tangible threats that I found, can find at all that NATO is able to deter. I make in my paper a brief comparison with Central European, Eastern European states in the 1990s. I show why is it totally different circumstances for them and for Serbia today, but I won't go there. So the main threat actually is NATO itself. And you can also hear this as an argument. That's like being on the menu part of the argument. So it says, and it makes sense, the bigger the threat from NATO is, the more incentives Serbia has to join. And if you remember that great documentary, Fall of Milosevic, BBC, and that famous piano bar talk between Christopher Hill and Milutinovic, if it ever happened, that's the logic behind it. However, if the threat is high, the more threat is more expressed, the less public support is going to be for making such a policy. And the biggest, the strongest sentiment related to NATO membership is that it's a threat to national identity. So these are considerations that must be taken into account. The logic makes sense, but in pragmatic terms, I can't see this policy or argumentation as viable. So that would be the first argument. The second one is closely related. It says NATO membership will bring peace and security to Serbia. If you look at theoretical approaches, There are two things any state can do in order to have peace and security. One is developing economy, and the second one, building democratic institutions. That's two things that basically make any government less attractable to either foreign or internal problems, so to say. But these are not linear processes. These have its ups and downs, and that's one part of the argument. The second one, they cost a lot, and they take a long time. So joining a defensive alliance is a shortcut, especially if you have allies that are committed to the defense of a member state. It makes perfect sense. It is, again, a strong argument. However, it doesn't take into account the fact that the same process, having allies that are committed to defense, make a moral hazard. So some of the member states may actually prove to be more aggressive, and that's strongly supported by a recent research. So how does a state deter this aggressive behavior of some other country, or how can it escape from any obligations that it doesn't really want to act upon? Depends on the country's bargaining position inside the alliance. It's not true that every member in the alliance have same opportunities. And I would argue that Serbia's bargaining position will be very low. It won't have a say in whether it wants or doesn't want to join these basically acts that it doesn't agree upon. So argument makes sense, but it avoids talking or conceals risk that comes with it. Third argument, I would say, is that NATO membership will ensure Serbia does not become a geostrategic island, that it won't become surrounded by hostile neighbors. I found these and the next arguments much less viable than the first one and the second. My arguments are threefold. Serbia has passed the line where return to the isolation of the 90s is conceivable at all. One, because of its EU membership, and the second, because of Partnership for Peace membership, which purpose was to avoid this kind of isolation. The second argument is that this argument can't explain variation in relations of Serbia with its neighbors. Romania became a NATO member in 2004. Serbia continued to have the best possible relations with Romania. Albania became a NATO member in 2009. Still, the relations are worst possible. So NATO membership is not an explaining variable in the relations of Serbia with its neighbors. Finally, the third thing I want to say is that NATO can avert wars or armed conflicts between its members, but it can't prevent conflicts between its members. And the best possible example is the example of Greece and Turkey. So this argument promises more than it can deliver. 2 more minutes, I hope. Fourth argument, Serbia, and this is, I think, the worst argument I have heard so far, is that NATO will improve Serbia's position towards Kosovo issue and even bring back Serbian troops on Kosovo in NATO uniforms. Basically, Serbia can't become member with Kosovo conflict baggage. That's clearly stated in the 1995 study of NATO enlargement. Second, even if it could, the bringing of a new member in alliance depends on unanimous decision in North Atlantic Council. I find the possibility that Albania would allow for such a thing not viable. Third, it counts on perpetual engagement of NATO on Kosovo, which is, again, we can't be sure. If we look at Bosnian developments, EU can take the mission in the future, and then the whole argument basically disappears. I have 4 more arguments. 1 minute, okay. I'll just briefly say, I find that arguments 5 and 6, these are arguments that say NATO is a facilitator of internal reforms. 5 and 6 are arguments that NATO will modernize an army and reduce military spending. I find it very strong argument, but the claim that Serbia will spend less is not viable, and there is also no consensus between NATO membership advocates on this issue. Sixth argument is that NATO will condition the reform of security sector. It makes sense. Security sector reform is already conditioned by Serbia's EU membership process. Two more arguments that NATO will enable more foreign investments. I find it very difficult to prove in a major study. As far as I know, there is no major study that can prove this. The major problem is that all the states have pursued NATO and EU membership simultaneously. You can't separate these two. However, there is a little extra argument I go to in order to improve this one, is that empirical evidence showed that there is a rise in US foreign direct investments, and this is empirically proven. However, US investments in Serbia are a smaller part, so the biggest investor in Serbia is neutral Austria, and on the other part, there are other factors that explain why are there no more US FDI. And last argument. NATO membership will give impetus to EU membership. I find it, again, not very viable. If you look at the support for EU membership from 2003, when it was 72%, to this year, when it's 52%, and after the visit of Angela Merkel, I would argue it's for the first time under 50%, the support for EU membership is slowly falling. The support for NATO was 12 to 13% in 2000, 2001, and now it's 15%, so it's not rising. If we want to keep support for EU membership alive, basically above 40%, we should keep these two issues separated, because it would be detrimental for both if we go back to the policy of before 2007. I have some general findings and conclusions, but I'll just skip to that, and I hope I can answer some of the questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vujo, for your presentation exploring the reasons why Serbia should or rather should not join NATO, and for trying to stick to my strict time frame. Our next speaker is Sigurd Neubauer. I hope I'm pronouncing his name properly. Now, he is a defense and foreign affairs specialist and works for SOS International, which is based in DC. And I'm just going to read the interesting sort of explanation about what this organization is about. It's a privately held operations support company providing information engagement, intelligence solution, and stability operations support to the US government. Now that sounds interesting, if not very precise. But so maybe he can explain a bit more about that. But today, actually, he's here to talk about another aspect of foreign and security policy, which is becoming increasingly important in the Western Balkans, and that is energy security. So the title of his presentation is, Could the emerging Balkan-Israeli strategic alliance alter energy security in the East Mediterranean basin? So the floor is yours, and you've got 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here today, and thank you to the organizers for putting this fantastic event together. I suppose I'm the only practitioner. I'm not an academic. I'm not an aspiring professor, at least not quite yet. But what I will try to talk about today is not so much theoretical issues that are connecting the Israeli emerging relationship with the Balkans, but rather some of the practical components that have developed over the last few months and even weeks and even past couple of days. And as my colleague here on the panel talked about, he talked about Turkey's emerging role in the region, and that is something that I think all of us have seen has also played out with Turkish relationship with Israel. However, my focus will align a little bit further away from there and look at some of the strategic alliances that Israel is now beginning to form with the countries in the Balkans. And those alliances are very much in the working, and both Greek, Israeli, Bulgarian, and Romanian officials have told me that the window of opportunity to create a new alliance was really came about right after last year's Gaza flotilla. In other words, the Gaza flotilla was not only seen as a standoff between Israel and Turkey, but also between, as a sign of warning to Cyprus, to Greece, and even to Romania and Bulgaria. And I will talk a little bit about that and how that came about. To begin my presentation, in the vacuum following that standoff, we saw a lot of traffic from Israel, official delegations traveling very quickly to these countries, promising deeper intelligence cooperation, promising deeper military-to-military operations and exercises, but also deepening political and economic ties. So the alternative alliance, if you want, that Israel is forming is not necessarily an alliance against Erdogan and what is seen as his aggressive neo-Ottoman policy, but also it is based on realpolitik as Israel sees it. And one of the components that is strengthening Israel's realpolitik is the recent discovery of massive natural gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean. The reason I say the Eastern Mediterranean is that that region is divided, its waters are divided between Lebanese waters, Cypriot waters, and Israeli waters, and to some extent Egyptian waters. And within that larger geographical context, we have seen possibly trillions of dollars of natural gas. So the question is, how will that gas be distracted, and how will it be supplying European markets? And these are very much discussions that are undergoing. At the backdrop, however, of these gas finds are also some emerging conflicts. And the first emerging conflict we see is between Cyprus and Turkey. Since Turkey occupied northern Cyprus in 1974, Turkey is not recognizing the Cypriot government's authority to manage all its natural resources. So subsequently, what we have seen as recent as last year, Cyprus and Israel, they signed a joint economic zone where both of them demarked their territorial waters. And Turkey responded very unfavorably. Actually, last month, Turkey said, quote, there would be deep consequences if Israel and Cyprus would go ahead with oil and gas explorations. About a week after that statement was made by Davutoglu, the Cypriot foreign minister traveled to Israel, and she received not only full endorsement by Netanyahu and Avigdor Lieberman for her position, for the Cypriot position, but in fact, President Shimon Peres is traveling to Cyprus, and so is Netanyahu later on. The Cypriot president paid a landmark visit, the first visit of any Cypriot president to Israel earlier in March, and he said, quote, that Israel is one of Cyprus' most important strategic allies. And so that is one of the contexts that we're seeing. The second context is for dispute in the Eastern Mediterranean waters are between Lebanon and between Israel, because there is a territorial dispute of roughly 850 square kilometers, and that disputed territory is believed to contain billions of dollars worth of energy. As recent as a week ago, Erdogan said that he would send Turkish warships into the Eastern Mediterranean. It was unclear where that would be, if it would go into Cypriot waters or if it would go into Lebanese waters. That remains to be seen. Now, at the backdrop of that, what you have seen with the commercial outreach that Israel and Cyprus are engaging in over the energy is also discussions over whether a joint liquefaction gas liquefaction center will be built in southern Cyprus, and then build gas pipelines from there either to Greece or either directly from the Israeli gas fields to Greece, and those gas pipelines will supply future markets in Bulgaria and in Romania. Um, in addition to the economic policy driving that new alliance, is also a critical military and national security component. And as I said, the flotilla incident provided a space for a new alliance as um, Greece became very, very wary of the new foreign policy that Turkey has taken. And Greece is the only country really in that region, to my knowledge, that has not been able to define its territorial waters beyond 6 nautical miles. According to international law, every state has the right to define its territorial waters up to 12 nautical miles. Turkey has declared that if Greece were to extend their territorial waters to 12 nautical miles, it would be considered, quote, a declaration of war. And that statement or that decision was made in 1995 and still stands. Um, for Israel choosing to align itself with Greece, Cyprus, and Bulgaria also has a critical domestic foreign policy component, I will argue, and that is that we have seen over the past couple of years, we have seen that the Israeli public have moved towards the right. They have elected Avigdor Lieberman as its foreign minister. Avigdor Lieberman's party, Israel Beiteinu, is the third largest party in the Netanyahu coalition. I'm sorry, in the Knesset, and the second largest in the coalition. We have also seen that the Israeli public are becoming more and more skeptical to whether the two-state solution with the Palestinians is achievable. And it is the general fatigue of the Middle East that have also served to drive this new approach towards the Balkan. And one of the components driving that fatigue has been that Israel felt that it has lost a series of alliances in the Middle East. First, they lost Iran in 1979. Then they lost, arguably, Turkey, not because of the flotilla, but Israeli officials will say that relations with Turkey started to deteriorate as early as right after the Operation Kaslet, in other words, the Gaza war in 2008. So Israel has lost Turkey and Iran, and now it remains unclear what will happen with Egypt. Mubarak was seen as a pillar in Israel's regional relationship with the Middle East, and now that Mubarak is gone, it is unclear what a future Israeli relationship with that country will look like. So, for an Israeli national security interest, all the joint military and intelligence corporations have literally evaporated over time, and in some instances over weeks. So as an alternative, Israel is looking for countries that are close to its geographical vicinity, and those countries are, as I said, Greece, Cyprus, and Bulgaria. And what we have seen is that since, how am I doing on time? Okay, so since the flotilla, Israel has carried a series of military exercises in the Balkans, 2 in Greece, one military exercise, it was an Air Force exercise that was not too far from the Turkish border, was concluded on the day that flotilla ships were supposed to depart from Greek ports this summer. So the timing was impeccable. As far as that military exercise also helped, I would argue, to prevent these flotilla ships from departing Greek ports. And And moreover, a second exercise was carried out in Romania last summer. That exercise became known to the public after it turned into a deadly disaster, and one helicopter crashed in the mountains, and I believe it was 6 Israeli airmen who died, and a Romanian air soldier. And one of the reasons that Israel is looking to carry out complex Air Force exercises in the Balkan countries is that Israel's geographic terrain is very small, it is very limited, and for those reasons, in order for the Israeli Air Force to always have what they consider a pivotal national security component is to have a quantitative edge, and for that they need different geographies, mountainous terrain, and in other words, terrain that doesn't exist in Israel. Now, if you want to get into conspiracy theories, and I'm not going to get into that, but I'll mention it nonetheless, that is that some of the Air Force exercises between Israel and Greece have been in the same length as allegedly from Israel to Iran, but that's up for the observer to speculate if there's any connections there. Nonetheless, the military relationship between Israel and the Balkans is not just limited to Air Force exercises. Israel has offered extensive foreign aid, which includes national security training, capacity building, in some cases even offering to provide technologies for airport, seaport securities, and counter-extremism operations. So these are issues that the Israelis have offered over the last year or so. And quite frankly, this has been a very successful policy. In other words, it is not just the Israelis who are looking to cooperate with the Balkans, but also the Balkan countries have come to Israel. When the Bulgarian Prime Minister visited Israel early last year, he requested a special meeting with the Mossad, with Mossad Chief Meir Dagan, about increasing intelligence cooperation. Meir Dagan visited Sofia shortly after. What they talked about, Meir Dagan and the Bulgarian Prime Minister, I'm not sure, but I'm sure it's not about the Israeli opera's upcoming visit to Sofia. Nonetheless, so these are some of the issues that are driving there. Finally, and I'll keep to my time, there's also the political components cementing those relationships. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has received assurances from Bulgaria, Romania, Cyprus, Greece, and in addition to some other European countries, that these countries will vote against the Palestinian UN initiative. In other words, next week, actually, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has vowed that he will unilaterally declare a statehood at the UN. And Netanyahu has gotten assurances that the countries here will not vote in favor of that position. And lastly, what we are seeing is that the joint exercises and the joint intelligence and political cooperation that is slowly emerging also has a personal touch to them. Netanyahu apparently understands himself very well with many of these leaders. He has a great rapport with them, and in return, at least this is what Israeli media reports have said, in return for abstaining to vote at the UN for the Palestinian position, both Romania and Bulgaria will have 1,000 workers that will be able to work in Israel as an economic reward, and meanwhile 350 Turkish construction officials are being expelled. So Israel is cementing its relationship with these countries, not only on the political, economic, and militarily, but it is part of an interrelative alliance as Israel is seeing losing ground in the Middle East. And also it is a way out for Israel to remove itself out of its present international isolation. So that's all I have.
Thank you. It was a very interesting presentation, and especially for the practical policy insight into the developments between Israel and the Balkan states. And our final speaker for today is Laura MacLeod. She has recently become a lecturer in international politics at the University of Manchester, but previously completed her PhD in gender politics in post-conflict Serbia at the University of Sheffield. Today, Laura will present part of her research on post-conflict personal political imaginations, understanding meanings of gender security, exploring the effects of that ideas have on the creation and design of security policy in Serbia. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay. Afternoon, everyone. I was really excited about this conference because of the blend of academics, policymakers and other practitioners. And I thought it was a chance to think through some of the issues that have been bothering me lately. Namely, why is it important to think about the multiple meanings of gender security, and why is this understanding useful to practitioners? Okay then. My work is heavily inspired by continental political philosophy, especially French post-structuralism, and therefore I am concerned with language and meaning, that is, discourse. This approach is often thought to be less useful to policymakers and think tanks, NGOs and other practitioners, less useful than more instrumental social science approaches. It is my intention in this paper to begin thinking through some of the ways in which language and meaning matter, and how concern with these issues can go some way toward creating a useful dialogue. My dominant concern is with the meaning of gender security, and I will explain more about that later. What I'm going to do is analyse 3 initiatives in Serbia related to gender security, and I will argue that different post-conflict personal political imaginations lead to very different interpretations of gender security, shaping a subsequent policy that it designs. Investigating how potentially conflicting gender security policy is made is useful to practitioners as it enables effective dialogue with awareness of how political ideas are organised and reproduced in the making of a policy. To explore this argument, the first part of this paper will elaborate the notion of personal political imagination. The second part of the paper will outline 3 gender security initiatives in Serbia, and this analysis will demonstrate that the way in which gender security is conceptualised is constitutive of a particular post-conflict personal political imagination. Finally, this paper will conclude with a discussion of why it is useful for policymakers to understand how potentially contrasting gender security policy objectives can develop. Okay. So, I will talk about what I mean by personal political imagination. The term personal political imagination is intended to weave together the popular feminist insight that the personal is political and the post-structural perception that discourses operate within a specific temporal and spatial context. Personal memories, experiences, hopes and dreams merge with and shape political life, struggles, ambitions and history, forming an imagination. In imagining a vision, a hope for the future, particular narratives about the past and present are invoked through recalled memories, perceptions and experiences. As such, an imagination about the possibilities of gender security will be connected to a range of temporal moments, including past, present and future. To say that an imagination is personal political recognises the ways in which power is infused within a particular imagination. Accepting that private and personal elements shape public and political outcomes and vice versa challenges the perception that the production of policy is devoid of personal experiences and knowledge. Furthermore, these personal political imaginations are not just individual, they are also collective. That is, groups and organisations can develop a specific personal political imagination that reflects their principles as well as the experiences and knowledge of the individuals who form part of that group. So, in summary, the notion of personal political imagination refers to the limitation and possibility of our personal and political experience. Personal political imagination not only makes possible our world, but also inscribes the boundaries of our world. As such, our personal political imagination profoundly affects our individual and collective ambitions, including the formulation of policy. Why is this relevant to Serbia? Well, when I did my fieldwork in Serbia, what was really striking to me was actually how much perceptions about Serbia's relationship to conflict and post-conflict came out in every single interview that I did. So I argued that in Serbia, one particular personal political imagination relates to the complexity of Serbia's relationship to conflict and post-conflict is understood. Now, I'm used to audiences who know very little about Serbia, so apologies if I've tread over material you already know. Serbia has a complex relationship to conflict, primarily relating to the extent to which the Serbian state and society can be said to be responsible for the atrocities committed in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia and Kosovo during the 1990s. Bluntly, there are a number of competing narratives about Serb responsibility, guilt and participation in the war and in committing war crimes. These tensions about responsibility shape the political debate of an apparently post-conflict era. The relationship that Serbia has to conflict and post-conflict becomes messier when we consider how Serbia suffered many of the consequences associated with war during the 90s. Economic problems, sanctions, the growth of corruption and refugees. And not only that, the NATO bombing of Serbia in 1999 adds another layer of complexity to the picture of conflict and post-conflict as it relates to Serbia. Okay, and now I want you all to hold the thought that we all have a personal political imagination about Serbia's relationship to conflict and post-conflict. And I will argue that this has shaped the way in which we think about how to interpret gender security in Serbia. But what is gender security? It is not my intention here to set out a definition of gender security. In fact, I refuse to fix a definition, a concept, or a notion of gender security because I recognise that the performance of gender security discourse functions within a particular social and political context. However, my interest in gender security has been provoked by the growing concern with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and associated Women, Peace and Security Resolutions 1820, 1888, 1889 and 1960. These resolutions all urge for more effective gender perspective within UN peacekeeping and post-conflict processes. Initially, the resolution was designed to affect the organisational arrangement of the UN system, but the impact of 1325 has been far-reaching, with feminist organisations conducting advocacy work relating to 1325, countries like Serbia adopting national action plans to implement 1325, as well as the stirrings of organisational change within regional and international institutions. I believe that 1325 is ideal as a framework to guide analysis of gender security, as it is at the intersection between discourses about gender and discourses about security. Examining the discursive positioning, articulation and representation of 1325 within a policy initiative reveals ways that gender security discourses are performed. This is because the resolution has to be translated not only literally into other languages, but also metaphorically. it is the process of translation that I am most interested in. How have different practitioners translated the resolution to reproduce their policy objectives related to gender security? Now, I have argued this in detail in a paper that is due to be published by the International Feminist Journal Politics. And in making this argument, I focused closely on 3 sites claiming political authority over 1325 in Serbia, highlighting a connection between post-conflict personal political imagination and how gender security is translated. And I'm just going to very briefly summarise this. Okay, the first site of political authority is CSAC, which is more, Southeastern European, more clearinghouse. And this is an agency which has been partially supported by the UNDP. In 2008, CSAC produced a report titled Firearms Possession and Domestic Violence in the Western Balkans in response to the demands of 1325. Now, in terms of post-conflict imagination, the report focuses on the consequences of war and conflict for Serbia and attributes the increase in small arms and light weapons abuse to the instability of a post-conflict era. But in the report, the notion is that it can all be resolved through targeted capacity building and development. These notions are actually mirrored in how gender security is interpreted. The concept is interpreted as one which protects vulnerable women from the consequences of conflict, and their vulnerability can be tackled through targeted and appropriate international support. The second side of political authority, claiming political authority over 1325, is the NGO, Women in Black. Women in Black have sought to localise 1325 by producing a draft resolution listing specific recommendations that they claim would implement 1325. Now, a core value held by Women in Black activists relates to political responsibility. Activists insist that in a post-war, post-Milosevic era, Serbian institutions and society need to resist the denial of war crimes committed in the name of Serbia during the 1990s and deal with militarised violence that remained embedded in society. The post-conflict problem identified by Women in Black activists relates to the principle of political responsibility, which is critical for Women in Black activists who understand conflict as a consequence of deeper problems in society. So, while the post-conflict personal political imagination reinforces the notion and the importance of political responsibility, the achievement of gender security is also linked to political responsibility. So, for Women in Black, gender security is achieved through altering dominant social values in Serbian society and taking steps towards political responsibility. The third side of political authority over 1325 relates to the Ministry of Defence, the Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence, and the draft National Action Plan. Now, as most of you probably know, a National Action Plan to implement 1325 in Serbia was accepted by the Serbian Parliament in December 2010. Before this happened, a series of consultations took place, and that is what my analysis focused on, these consultations. I read the report produced by all of the working groups that were coordinated by the Belgrade Fund of Political Excellence in the Ministry of Defence to formulate a recommendation towards a draft National Action Plan. Now, these recommendations incorporate several different visions of post-conflict, but it is quite striking that the dominant representation of Serbia's relationship to conflict and post-conflict actually emphasises Serbia's future participation in external peacekeeping forces. Within these recommendations, the need for international legitimacy is inscribed, suggesting a desire to escape connotations with a post-conflict past. That is, the formulation of a national action plan is seen as a progressive move designed to enhance international legitimacy. Connected with these progressive assumptions is the notion that instrumental equality is a way of achieving gender security. The gender security logic that presented in the recommendation for a draft national action plan placed emphasis upon measurable, quota-based indicators of a participation and involvement of women in the Serbian defence sector. This liberal vision of gender security as instrumental equality echoes the desire to represent Serbia as a modernised, liberal democratic state which had moved on from the problems arising from the conflict of the 1990s. Okay. Now, I want to make it clear that I do not believe that any of those initiatives are wrong or inappropriate. This is a critique, not a criticism. Rather, I want to make the point that the comparison of those three initiatives and how conflict is thought about and how gender security is thought about actually reveals that there is a connection between our personal political imaginations of conflict and post-conflict as it relates to Serbia and subsequent policy which is developed. And I want to make the point that comparison is a very powerful tool for exposing specific assumptions that are otherwise not questioned. It is the exposure of specific assumptions that is the critical thought to hold here. A specific assumption refers to the assumptions underpinning courses of action, and yet these assumptions are rarely explicitly voiced or even understood by the decision maker. These assumptions are often based upon life, both personal and collective experiences, which is knowledge that can be difficult to transfer to another person. In this paper, comparisons of post-conflict personal political imagination have revealed specific assumptions that underpin interpretations of gender security. These specific assumptions can sometimes be the source of misunderstanding. Put simply, not everyone thinks in the same way, and nor should we assume they do. And our forgetting of those specific assumptions that we are often not aware of can lead us to talking and producing policy across purposes. By way of concluding, I will reflect upon the usefulness of knowledge about specific assumptions, making sense of some specific assumptions about that shape policy relies upon a comparison of meaning and language. I wish to make the argument that post-structural theories of language have much to offer policymakers and practitioners. Thinking critically about our ideas, meaning and language enables us to avoid unconsciously reproducing different forms of oppression and exclusion that potentially arise from policy. This critical engagement is not in pursuit of a somehow better or perfect policy, given that perfection is an impossible task and better is subjective, but rather an awareness of how political ideas are organised and how these ideas are reproduced in the making of a policy. Awareness of how political ideas are organised is relevant to the process of making gender security policy. Awareness of some specific assumptions underpinning how we conceptualise gender security could open way for more effective dialogue between groups that may normally be at odds with each other. This effective dialogue potentially opens up space for making meaningful policy. This is not to say that it would be a better policy, but rather a policy that would be significant to all stakeholders, and surely that is useful. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura, for the very interesting presentation. And now I'd open the floor for questions from the audience. We've got one here and then over there. Just a second, there's the microphone coming.
Is it okay? Okay. It would be rather a comment on Dr. Kaliber's presentation. I appreciate your academic approach. I really like it. But I have criticism to the new Ottomanism concept. I think that Turkish political leadership must be aware that New Ottomanism in practice is a destabilizing factor in southeastern Europe. It is more or less a new Turkish imperial concept. We have many historical problems with Serbs, with Romanians, with Greeks, but all of us have in common this great period in history when all of us were second-hand people as Christians, and all of us were in definite periods subjugated to kinds of acts of genocide. And so the Turkish leadership should be aware that New Ottomanism is destabilizing factor in southeastern Europe, and on the other hand, it is causing a rise of nationalism parties in all other Southeast European states. So it's a critique to Turkish political leadership, not to your approach, which I like as an academic one. Thank you.
Should I wait for other?
I think we'd better collect the questions from the audience, and then you'll get the chance to, yeah.
Florent Marciac, University of Luxembourg. Shortly, Ottomanism, it depends on what age, because it used to have also a golden age where it was very attractive also to comparison to Western Europe. So I wouldn't point it as a negative, basically, concept. So two short questions. The first one for Mr. Kalibet. You mentioned that regionalism is a political construct, and it is. It's also sometimes very much a contested concept. I would like to ask you to what extent the regionalism of Turkey, so activism in the Western Balkans, collides or supports Europe regionalism, so European regionalism at a higher level. So to what extent, for instance, Turkey may use activism in the Western Balkans in its rapprochement with the EU. The second question goes to Mr. Rilic. So I understood that you're quite very critique, you have a strong critique against NATO accession. But so far, actually there is little pan-European or all-European security organization. There is the OSCE, which is very weak. The EU has also its drawbacks. So you are making a cost and benefit analysis, taking Serbia at a very individualistic level. But I would ask you to look at the collective level. To what extent, if there is no plans for accession, can Serbia contribute to all European security if it's not participating? Switzerland is using its skills as negotiator. Austria is very much involved in UN politics. So how do you see Serbia's role then? Thank you.
Philip, next. Anyone else? Okay.
Again, for Vujo, a question on, well, you have mentioned the upcoming elections in 2012, and my question is fairly simple. Do you see the issue of eventual NATO membership being discussed by actors? By whom? Who will try to benefit from it? Who will try to hurt its opposition from it? Or do you feel that it will be one of those issues that will be put under the table for some other times? Thank you.
Philip.
Filip Eidus, University of Belgrade. Thank you all for very exciting presentations, but I will ask only one question, or I will make one comment, which is going to be a reaction to both Sigurd and Alper's presentation, because I think these two pretty much talk to each other. Alper, at the outset of your presentation, you drew on the regional security complex theory, and according to Buzan and Weaver in their book from 2003, Turkey is an insulator state, whereas the Middle East and European regional security complexes are treated as mutually exclusive, separate regional security dynamics. However, if your argument is correct, and I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be, that Turkey is establishing itself now as a regional power, not as an insulator which is not strong enough to connect the security dynamics between the Middle East and Europe, but as a state which actually penetrates both regions, both the Middle East and the Western Balkans. Aren't we witnessing at the moment actually the merging of two security complexes, actually the sub-complex of Western Balkans and the Middle East? Maybe one case in point could be exactly what Sigurd was talking about, how Israel is actually now trying to establish alternative alliances in the Western Balkans. And if this is actually a tendency, how it may evolve in the future. It's a question for both presenters, since I think both of you spoke about the subject. Thank you.
Any other questions? I think, yeah, this is the...
Okay, only a small comment on Vujo Ilić's lecture. You mentioned Stephen Walt's work, Origins of Alliances. I would recommend you to consult also another author who is called Randall Schweller, because I think his theory of balance of interest can better suit you for your arguments than theory of balance of threats of Waltz can. Because the main problem between Serbia and NATO is not much about threats as it is about interests. We have conflicted interests. What we want to get, NATO won't give us. Quite otherwise, NATO deprived us of many values, including national territory, during the wars in the 90s. So we don't have any interest to become member of NATO.
Thank you for your questions. If there's other questions, we'll continue, but now I invite the speakers to respond. So we can start with the same order. I'll go first and then we'll respond.
Okay. Thank you very much. So first, neo-Ottomanism. Sorry, I totally agree with that neo-Ottomanism. Any discourse implying that Turkey is developing sort of neo-Ottomanist policies will be counterproductive. And I said in my presentation, I said this. So, but this neo-Ottomanism is a very complex issue, basically. This term was first invented by Muransan and by some other scholars who are mainly of Western origin. And in Turkey, some other scholars also used this term. But and the governments, the Islamic-rooted government officials, sometimes made declarations which could be interpreted as implying some neo-Ottomanism, but then they totally tried to avoid it. I mean, 2 days ago, I was talking to the chief advisor of Turkish Prime Minister, and he said to me that this term is reproduced and always used by some people or some politicians who are trying to sort of prevent Turkey from being an active regionalist power. but you are right, this term shouldn't be just, is very counterproductive. It cannot produce anything, and Turkey shouldn't remind this sort of its imperialist legacy in the Balkans. But if I'm not wrong, you implied that I ally with these arguments or with the government. I'm very critical of the government positions generally. So I was here trying to just summarize or tell the rhetoric, the discourses of Turkish foreign policy. I was not saying all these as I agree with that. So I just wanted to remind this point. Because as an academic, we are not official people, so we don't need to repeat the official discourses. We are not representing the country's official policies. That's why I rather found disappointing my colleague here and his analysis on Israeli-Turkish relations and other Israeli policies, because to my opinion, as academics, we always need to be critical about the official discourses. Regarding the EU and Western Balkan relations, yes, while I was outlining the 5 reasons why Turkey is trying to engage in Western Balkans, I just forgot to tell the 5th reason I noticed, and this was related to the EU membership. Turkey supports the NATO membership of various Western Balkan countries, and also supports regional, bilateral and regional integration. For instance, remember the Istanbul Declaration between Bosnia and Herzegovina, Turkey and Serbia as a peaceful means of regional rapprochement. And one of the reasons for this engagement is EU membership, of course. Turkey, as you know, historically tries to be permanent member of the European club, and the EU membership, of course, is the sine qua non of this membership, the position. So Turkey also needs the Western Balkans and Balkan countries' support in its EU bid. So one of the reasons for the engagement is that. And there was a third question or comment regarding, insulator state and RSC. Buzan and Weber, when they published this book in 2003, in fact, they tried to map out the regional security dynamics all over the globe. And this was a task which shouldn't be achieved, really. And the book is unfortunately full of repetitions and misleading. So theoretically, yes, it provides so many things to us, but in my article regarding the Cyprus problem, I focused on widely this RSCT issue, and I also one of the main criticisms that I directed against this theory was regarding the insulator state position. I agree with you that Turkey cannot be defined as insulator state, because this is rather a kind of static position, but Turkey has very dense security and insecurity relations with, for instance, Greece. And Greece, according to RSCT, belongs to another regional security complex. So, Turkey has very dynamic security-insecurity relationships, and this term insulator state really does not is not well established to explore the intensity of these relations. Regarding the Israeli case, I don't want to speculate on this. Turkey could have managed all this process better, but we shouldn't forget that the 9 Turkish civilians were killed in the international waters. This is a crime, and this is illegitimate aggression. But of course, the issue much more complex than this. But Turkey and Israel need to find some ways of engaging this issue, because Turkey cannot be a real regional power if it reconciliates with Israel, or if unless it reconstructs peacefully its relations with Israel. Because remember, one of the main motto of Turkish foreign policy was zero problem. But this now these relations is pretty strained, and it contradicts with that. So Turkey and Israel, of course, within a legitimate and fair framework and humanitarian framework, should find a way of institutionalizing peace in the Middle East and in the wider region. Thank you very much.
So basically, I just want to say at the beginning that my paper was not against NATO membership of Serbia. If I wanted to say that I'm against, I would use other arguments. There are much better arguments. I'm trying to critique these arguments, but because they're being taken as self-evident truths. And I say it's not the fact. They should be discussed. I'll try to answer the first question. I believe that Serbian military has great experience from 1991 to 2001. This experience can be used, and Serbia can enter into a process of profiling itself as a state with a military which participates in peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace-building operations through European Union or United Nations. This is a space that is very unused in Serbia. It's not being used, this experience that the military have and the potential for its future development. But I would say in order to advance in that direction, there should be some sort of peace strategy, which is like things that states do have. So basically, next to security strategy, defense strategy, there should be some sort of peace strategy that would basically streamline Serbia's role in peacekeeping operations. I think that's the way that Serbian military could go in the future, and perhaps not being in NATO could actually enhance this profiling process. As to Marco's question, I believe that the leading Democratic Party is not going to change its stance towards NATO, and I see a couple of days ago, Minister of Defense interview in Jane's Defense. It's basically getting in line with what the Democratic Party is going to say and propose towards the next elections. Of course, the oppositional parties are going to benefit more from the issue. They will find some cause to raise the threat, or so-called threat of NATO again, and they will benefit. But just a wild thought. I mean, we had already a major oppositional party that made a U-turn towards European integration that has a very strong conservative credentials. I wouldn't be totally surprised if they make, Nikolic and Progressive Party, if they make some change in their policy. If they made a change of policy towards the EU, they can make the same policy towards NATO. They might be the beneficiaries. I don't know. Finally, Vladimir's question, of course, Schweller would be the second theorist that I would use. I simply did not have either time or place to write about it too. And I was trying to base the argument on the benefits. And interests are sort of things that I try to avoid whenever I analyze international relations or foreign policy, because I simply don't believe in existence of objective national interest. So that's something I basically try to disapprove in anything I do. So that's why I wouldn't base on Schweller, but on Walls. So that's this.
So a couple of questions or comments, particular to what Professor Alpe said, and I agree fully that there needs to be some sort of a political solution found between Turkey and Israel on the flotilla issue. But what Israeli officials seem to believe is that the flotilla issue is not the main issue. That is not where the Turkish-Israeli crisis began, but rather it is the latest stage of a series of incidents that have perpetuated into a permanent state of crisis. And for instance, last year, I believe it was October or November in 2010, the Turkish National Security Council declared Israel as an enemy state. It put Israel on the list of enemy states. Greece is still on Turkey's list of enemy states, although that was apparently downgraded. And Iran's list on that, Iran's position on that list was also downgraded, but only to the extent where the Turkish military apparently only sees Iran as a threat because of its nuclear program and not necessarily because of its host of other policies in the region. So having said that, that was a major contribution to why Israel is very reluctant not to apologize for the sake of apologizing, but because they believe that the relationship has already been so damaged that even if an apology were to be issued, it would not necessarily repair the relationship. And secondly, when it comes to intelligence cooperation between Israel and Turkey, it used to be strong, it used to be solid. Last year, Erdogan placed one of his political people as the head of Turkish National Intelligence Agency, and his name is Hakan Fidan. Hakan Fidan is seen by many in Israel as a radical Islamist. These are not my words. These are words that the Israelis are seeing. So since Hakan Fidan became the intelligence director in Turkey, the Israelis are fearing that some of the intelligence cooperation that they could have had in the past with bureaucrats, with civil servants, could be passed on to third entities, but also it suggests to many of them that intelligence cooperation has become politicized instead of maintained on a professional-to-professional level. And to fill that vacuum, we're seeing increasing intelligence cooperation with Cyprus in particular because Israel feels the need and the urgency to intercept weapon shipments, either from Iran, from Syria, on its way to Gaza. So Cyprus, strategically located in the Mediterranean, could possibly, in the future, conduct joint naval exercises with the Israelis and intercept some of the intelligence that Israel used to rely on from Turkey. So this is a paradigm shift, and for that reason, it is not surprising that Israel is trying to establish herself as a patron to some of the Balkan states, precisely because some of the Balkan states also fear that Turkey's more active role could lead to some sort of a neo-Ottoman policy. That might not be how Turkey is defining its positions, but that is certainly how a lot of these countries see them. And for that reason, we have seen the Mossad chief traveling to Romania, Bulgaria, to Greece, to Cyprus, and we're seeing increasing intelligence cooperation precisely because all these countries feel that that is a space that can be filled. And also, when it comes to Greece, as I mentioned in my presentation, Greece is the only country that presently is not able to fully declare its maritime border. So what Israel is trying to do is to use the energy issue to cement economic ties there, and for that reason, holistically include all the other issues and really cement an alliance there. So I think that it's still in the works. Some of it could be a natural bilateral cooperation. Some of it could be an anti-Turkish alliance if relations between Turkey and Cyprus don't improve, and if relations between Israel and Cyprus don't improve. But I guess that we will see how that issue is unfolding.
Quickly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, we have a saying in English, which is basically silence speaks volumes. And I'm actually quite interested in the fact that you didn't have any questions for me. In fact, I don't expect you to have questions. But I'm trying to work out, what is that big to me? Is that big something or nothing or something I hadn't thought of? So please come and tell me what that silence speaks, if that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? We've had a really interesting debate, and I'm sure there's a lot more food for thought, and we would discuss it afterwards in an informal setting. But for now, I'd like you to ask you to join me in thanking our presenters today.